Welcome back to another edition of CIO Water Cooler TV. My name's Neil C. Hughes, and today we're going to be joined by Rick Farrow, and he's the Executive Director of Strategy and Transformation at DHU Healthcare. But in his past, he's also worked at the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority. So today we're going to be talking about transitioning to hybrid working, the barriers that are needed to be overcome, and securing of confidential data. But to begin with, could we begin by setting the scene and telling everyone watching a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Rick Farrow. I'm ED of Strategy and Transformation for DHU Healthcare. So DHU are one of the largest providers of 111 and primary healthcare in the UK. And I've been with the business now for around 7 months.
Fantastic. Well, there's so much I want to talk with you about today. And to begin with, data security, I think, is a hot topic in all organisations. But the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority and in healthcare with patient confidentiality, etc., how do you ensure that data security is at its most resilient? Because it's such a challenging prospect, isn't it, for so many?
It absolutely is, Neil. You're absolutely right. So, back in my Nuclear Decommissioning Authority days, then, data and info security was the word and the law. It was the first and last consideration for any project or change. Very highly regulated in relation to, we held data all the way up to top secret. So, the manifestos for yellow cake plutonium storage and processing. They were obviously highly secure systems. The interesting thing about the nuclear group is that actually only about sort of between 3 and 6% of the information was highly secure, was sort of above official sensitive in rating. The challenge was that the group were so risk adverse that they tended to think of all of their data in that same category. So, the storage, the access, the processing, the ability to utilize and weaponize that data was a bit of a challenge because, there are a lot of hoops to jump through. So, the NDA, the sort of the collaboration in general across the group was quite good. But the tools and services in place took a lot of work to get some standard sort of integration and collaboration done to ensure that you could utilize that data effectively. So, generally, I think that the nuclear group, as many government sectors are now, they're around 10 years behind the curve in relation to not so much data security, but the ability to utilize that data and categorize it properly and, utilize things like cloud services and advanced analytics and all these wonderful tools to make decision-making and access to data more effective. So it's a relatively challenging environment to do data in the NDA because of those, those hoops you have to jump through in relation to accessing it. Health's a little bit different. So your general sort of patient record systems, many of the systems are hosted. So, for example, you may well have noticed in the news over the past sort of couple of months the Adastra system, which is which we use for 96% of our business, went down for around 30 days. Now, I can tell you that was a rough 30 days. I mean, you can imagine a business of thousands of call takers, thousands of clinicians, GPs, AMPs, all utilizing the same system for patient records, which all of a sudden isn't there. So they were in receipt of a cyber attack. We still haven't received to date yet the root cause analysis, but they had a cyber attack which facilitated them shutting down a good chunk of all of their systems, not just in healthcare, but in banking, services and utilities too. So this cyber attack went on for quite some time. It was, recorded in the news. It was a national cybersecurity registered incident. EPRR, which is the NHS emergency response protocol, was initiated. And it was a rough month. It was a rough month in dealing with all that. But the thing about hosted systems is they're great as long as they work, because all of the risk is almost with the hosted partner in relation to dealing with that information.
Yeah.
So all you have to do is then provide controls around the edge in relation to policies and procedures to make sure people aren't using non-authorized systems to share patient records and data. So we have the occasional hiccup, like someone saying Charlie in bed number 3 in hospital 6 shares something on a WhatsApp group to say, I'm sorry, he's passed away. You know, it's a tough thing to do, but, you know, again, it is against policy. It is an identifiable human being, and sharing information on their health is if it's done outside of an authorized system, then it is a breach of policy. So it's very much about training our people. And most of the rules in primary care and even some of the 111 processes, you know, they were generally designed in the 1940s. You know, these are not businesses that are aligned from a process basis to be innovative, to make the best of their data, to protect their patient records. So it's still very much an evolving picture in relation to adding control. And control is generally applied, from my perspective, in the businesses and in the hospitals themselves, because the policies and procedures have to be very closely monitored and any risks logged in a locale by locale basis.
So many great points in what you just said there, because I think, as you said, much of the industry is 10 years behind everyone else. And as employees, we're used to this digital economy. We've got everything on our phone and able to work from any device at any time, any location, any network. And then we're going into the workplace and it's a completely different set of rules. So the education part is so important. But what would you say the biggest challenges that you're currently facing within your role?
So, I mean, there's a couple of things that are going to be no surprise to anybody. So getting good people, let's start there. Yeah. So, you know, we've seen a 25% increase in bringing in architectural type resource. That's just in the last 10 months. 18% increase for network and infrastructure type roles, for example. So there is a recession coming. Now, how deep that recession is going to be and how long that's going to last, we don't know. But that does mean that we will see, generally, if we look at past evidence, we will see the market swamped with contract resource. Because obviously, you know, in a recession, when you've got to tighten your budgets, the first thing that go with the contractors. So I would expect in the next sort of 6 to 12 months to see prices slowly starting to come down for some types of resource. But again, you know, we're on our 5th iteration into the market for a third line technical support that covers our Azure and some of our Azure and Office 365 services, for example. So we retain that internally because we have lots of nuanced areas where we have to adjust configuration and add additional controls. And it's quicker to do it internally. So I think getting good people in is still a problem. You know, the market is still generally very, I guess it's very sort of user based. It's very sort of the contractor based at the moment because, you know, they are very much in demand. Secondly, with, you know, my current role within the healthcare industry, budget is definitely a challenge. So spending and the ability to realize value, especially around innovation, is a bit of a problem. So spending in the NHS is generally on frontline services, on the nurses, on the equipment, on the, you know, the processes, the ambulances, which is absolutely where it needs to be. There isn't an ambulance service in the UK right now that isn't under critical stress and in special measures. You know, it really is a very, very tough time for the NHS. So DHU being a key NHS supplier, you know, we almost fill that gap between, you know, that first route into care, into a GP or filtering out into a dentist or into another. You know, we're trying to keep people away from emergency departments because NHS report between 40 and 50% of cases that end up at the emergency department don't actually need to be there. So DHU are critical in providing those services. So budget is a key thing for us, and certainly, you know, one size doesn't fit any in relation to our business, because if you work across lots of different integrated care boards, they all do things different ways. And within those boards, you have different contracts and they do things different ways. So applying one solution to do one thing one way, you don't necessarily get economies of scale because you have to swap and change in relation to the localized market. And finally, I guess for me, the third thing is probably the accelerated pace of change. So the Integrated Care Board profile and change that was enacted in July 22. So again, going back to my comment earlier about some of the rules around how the NHS is structured and ran, they were very, very old and really weren't fit for purpose, especially in primary care. So the government changed the rules around integrated care boards. There are 42 of those across the UK. And again, we work with, I think, 4 or 5 of them. And they all want to do things different ways. And the great thing about this now is it really has opened the floodgates in relation to innovation. So if an integrated care board in North Hants sees how an integrated care board in Leicester works for ambulance validation or some of the services they provide, they'll say, well, that's great. We'd like to do that. Can you please throw that our way on how you do it? And it's great for DHU as a provider, because essentially we have the ability then to say, well, we've got a service to cover that now. Let's come in and work with you. So as great as that is, the business has grown in size probably double over the past 6 years. So what comes with that is a fantastic amount of demand on IT and technology and change and transformation. So I would say that, the ability to deliver that pace of change without risking patient experience, risking patient care, and having a quality of service, having a consistent quality to deliver is definitely a big challenge.
Absolutely. And of course, one of the other big challenges, as we mentioned a few moments ago, was around hybrid working. And I think over the last few years, we've seen examples in governments in the UK, the US, and even further, and people in senior management positions that, yes, security protocols are put in place, but they still can't help getting into those bad habits of forwarding work information to their personal email or their personal Dropbox, etc. So how have you protected data whilst teams are operating in hybrid working? Because, again, it's a big topic and a big challenge right now, isn't it?
It is. It absolutely is. And I'll be honest with you, Neil, there's no silver bullet. There's no one thing that's going to solve it. I mean, we have within DHU the basic tactical controls like multi-factor authentication for system and data access. We've got tools for monitoring, in relation to, data exfiltration and any spurious activity. What I would say, what I think has really increased our confidence in how we deliver this stuff is the recent changes. We've redesigned our program management office. So we have the integrated elements of, information systems, financial controls, risk adherence and appetite, all built into that process in relation to change and new projects. So were we to go live with, let's say an API for a patient record system in Leicester, then we're confident that it's been through all of the controls that we know that we've done all we can to protect that data in relation to us sending them information and then them sending them back to us. So everything from, the network, the database, the data security, the application layer, all of the things that actually make up that really rigorous framework on how you can provide assurance. I think we're in a much better place than we were certainly 12 months ago. I think the interesting thing for me with hybrid working and data, it's the nuances you don't understand. So I don't know whether you're like me. You can say I'm working from my kitchen today, and I've got an Alexa 5 feet from me over there, and I can tell you now that is listening all the time. Now there are controls in relation to turning off that listening, but the things that Amazon don't tell you is that every time they do a system update, they reset all those settings. So we can't always rely on our colleagues to go back in and say, right, well, turn off constant listening, turn off this, turn off that. So we've applied a policy in relation to working close to, remote assistants like Alexa or, Google. But again, it becomes very different because you apply the policy, but again, we can't rely on people to always adhere to that policy. So really, it is an incredibly difficult thing to get your arms around because it is people's home environment, and you can't dictate where, when, and how they work at home. And I would suggest as we move through this winter with the difficulties we have with winter pressures with the NHS and increased data security risk from our friends in Russia and across the rest of the world, then it's going to become an ever more prevalent problem. And I'll be honest, Neil, that there is no silver bullet.
Yeah, and there are so many of those digital assistants now. I know a friend that's got a Facebook portal device, so that's one that's always listening.
Yeah.
On Microsoft is Cortana, and the Siri on Apple, of course. There's so many different things there. It could be, it's like playing a game of whack-a-mole sometimes. And I'm curious, though, from all the organizations that you've been working with, are there any trends in the conversations you're having about how they've transitioned to hybrid working and the main barriers that they had to overcome?
So I was reading an article from Gartner a couple of months ago. So it said that, the middle of 2022, 63% of workers still indicate that they work from home at least 2, maybe 3 days a week. So we are seeing a slow drift back to work. But, obviously organizations working hybrid, it has been a challenge. It has been a challenge for a lot of organizations. Interestingly, a lot of smaller businesses that already had Office 365 and, the various other data sharing capabilities installed, it hasn't been too big a problem because it's just a case of, making sure that access to data network and licensing is right. Now, if I were to tell you about the NDA, so I was in the NDA 2019 till the middle of 21, and the NDA, because of the nature of the business, you're talking about 10,000 workers across the group. 98% of those people worked in the office 100% of the time. Yeah. So very, very small home working footprint. So again, that is not a 6 months I would like to live through again. It literally was. We were just bringing batches of people online in relation to Skype first, then Teams, another network upgrade where we could get it, another batch of laptops configured and sent out, another batch of Teams done. And it almost became this sort of big machine. Costs were an issue. 4 months into, we generally had about 50% of the people working hybrid, which was fantastic because, again, going from 10,000 people working in office all the time, half of those 4 months later working from home, great effort from everybody, but it certainly wasn't easy. DHU, slightly different. So you've got to think DHU have, again, biggest 111 care provider in the UK. They have lots of big call centres. So the biggest one's in Derby, it's around 600 people. We've got another big one in Albury that we're just opening now. And then we've got smaller ones in sort of Chesterfield and Northants and Leicester. So generally, the model is that they generally sit together because you have a call handler, then a more experienced nurse practitioner or somebody who has to, apply a level of expertise. So we're looking as we go forward to digitize all that with the ability to potentially work all that from home. So they work from queues within the Adastra system. They work from patient records in relation to what's sent to them as part of the queue. And they can do things like, prescriptions online and self-care, all this sort of stuff from various systems and access. So that's going to be a big push for us over the next 2 years, is to consolidate all those systems into a framework where it can be potentially done hybrid. But again, you are constrained by people having to work next to each other as part of a contract.
And I read, I think it was a great stat by Cisco recently, and they said something like, I think it was 98% of every meetings that go forward from this moment forward are going to involve somebody working remotely in a different location. So with that in mind, how can you effectively manage larger remote teams? And are there any particular collaboration tools that you have in place or that you're exploring or that interest you?
Well, certainly managing large remote teams. I mean, that's definitely been something I've become quite proficient at, as we all have over the last 2 years. So, I mean, let's start with some general rules then. So, I think task and time-based activity. So that's a key one. So I think with people working more remotely, it's easier to get distracted. It's easier to get off doing other things. It's easier to have a call with somebody else where you then slip into something else that you should be doing. So I find task and time-based activity, whether you're using Kanban or Sprint or another, product or capability, is critical. Now, my team meetings that I have, so I have a sort of drains up team meeting every Monday with all my department heads on and all of their teams sort of hanging off that once a month. So we have a very, very simplistic shared OneNote for all of the actions and all of the the sort of points to contest and all of the risks as part of that discussion. And, it's free, it works very well, and it's easily accessible for everybody. So it doesn't have to be a really expensive tool or a Slack or some online portal somewhere. It can be something quite simple. But as long as you are making all of that available, it's very visible, it's infinitely changeable in relation to those controls, then I think it can be quite a simple thing to apply for large teams, as long as you get the model and the rules right. The collaborative working spaces. So again, increasing that visibility. So we're now just rolling out our second phase of our Office 365 and Teams program. So again, one of the projects I initiated very quickly after I joined DHU was the upgrade to Office 365, which many businesses have done years ago, but they were still on Windows 10 when I got here. So that's been a big culture shock for everybody. And now we're slowly teaching people to use the tools, to use things like Teams channels, to use things like SharePoint data storage and task tracking. These are all great tools you can present to your business, all part of your E3 licensing that can provide really great value as long as you're training people to use them properly. Final thing, I think when you're managing large teams, you've got to agree what the whites of their eyes conversations are. So at some point, you're going to need to get together and draw on the walls and come up with a roadmap, come up with a plan, discuss certain tentative risks and actions you might have to take with some difficult conversations at the end of that. I think identifying what the shape of those conversations are and ensuring that those conversations are done face-to-face is critical, because I'm sure you've probably been through some of the same. I'm sure many of the listeners have it, in that there are some conversations that are good for online and good for digital. There are some that are not. And I've definitely made the mistake once or twice in getting a group of people together and trying to do through Teams, technology planning, architecture type functions, and it doesn't work very well. It doesn't. But when you're just talking about, general update, task-based board type activity, then it's absolutely fine for a digital or Teams or Zoom like capability. And then finally, I'd just say keep it simple. As I say, we're just rolling our teams out now, but with some very simple guidance on how you can do some of the basics with Office 365 in relation to data storage, access, permissions, and it's working very well. It's been very well received, and our ability to collaborate not just within our business but with our partners greatly increased. So it's going really well.
Well, thank you so much for sitting down and sharing your story with me today. I think over the last 3 years, everybody's been on this same journey from remote working at scale to hybrid working, to then exploring how can we improve hybrid working? How can we secure hybrid working and ensure that anyone can work from any device at any time in any location securely and safely? And as you said, people and education are right at the heart of all that. So a big thank you for taking the time to share that with me today.
Absolutely. Great to speak to you. Thanks very much.